We continue our work at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now I give the floor to Mr. Alexander Hook, Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, with the weekly updates from the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Mr. Hook, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Since I last spoke to you here, the SMM has recorded an increase in the level of violence in eastern Ukraine. Last week, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission recorded a 25% increase in the number of ceasefire violations compared to the previous week. The increase in the number of explosions caused by mortars, tanks, artillery was particularly notable. Last week, we recorded 365 such explosions compared to just over 100 the previous week. Violence comes with a price increasingly paid by civilians. Last week, a man was killed in Staro-Mikhailivka. We also confirmed that a man and a woman in Bakhmut were injured from unexploded ordnance, and another man was injured in shelling in Dokuchayevsk. More worrying than the level of violence is the nature of the violence. Its volatility, unpredictability, and its propensity to spread like a deadly virus. Take, for instance, the Popasna-Pervomaisk area. Relatively quiet the week before, the area was suddenly rocked by violence on Tuesday evening last week. Our monitors in Popasna that evening and into the early hours of the following morning recorded 100 mortar impacts in the area. Overall, last week, our monitors there recorded 63 explosions from artillery and 175 from mortars compared to just 6 explosions from artillery and 9 from mortar rounds the previous week. This previously relatively quiet area, the Popasna-Pervomaisk area, did in fact account for 65% of all recorded explosions caused by mortar, tanks and artillery last week. The following night, on 28th June, the virus, that is violence, spread to the Svetlodarsk area. After 2 consecutive weeks in which not a single explosion caused by a Minsk-proscribed weapon had been recorded there, our monitors in the forward patrol base there witnessed a 1-hour violent clash. In all, they heard at least 50 artillery and 10 mortar rounds. The violence continued the following nights, although thankfully not with the same intensity. A similar relative calm had prevailed in the Avdiivka-Yasynovata Donetsk airport area in the early part of last week. On Thursday, 29th June, violence erupted there. In just 3 hours, our monitors in Yasynovata recorded approximately 500 explosions. Dear friends, for some people, the armed conflict may be the continuation of politics by other means. But armed conflict is also a negation of politics. Violence thrives when men and women of goodwill fail to meaningfully engage, when they fail to adopt a constructive approach to resolving problems, when the zero-sum game is the only game they play. This approach leads to deadlock. We see commitment, but little implementation. There are few concrete steps taken. What steps, for instance, have been taken to protect key infrastructure upon which the civilian population relies? The sides have not even agreed on safety zones around key facilities, meaning that basic services like water, electricity and gas are regularly cut off as the sides fire from and on such facilities. Last week, for instance, our monitors noted damage to the Shastia power plant in Luhansk region. Other facilities, such as the Donetsk filtration plant, remain at the center of fighting, with the sides refusing to disengage. Possible repercussions are hard to define, but certainly are far-reaching. As well as threatening water and electricity supplies to hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of the contact line, a direct hit on the facility could result in the release of toxic chlorine, resulting in ecological and humanitarian disaster. Dear friends, there are many other areas where the sides could constructively come together, where commitment already was made could be given concrete form: prisoner exchange, trade and property issues, humanitarian aid provision, freedom of movement for the civilian population, etc. But an immediate priority for the sides must be the full implementation of the provisions governing the withdrawal of weapons and disengagement. So long as weapons remain in place and the sides remain in close proximity, the ceasefire cannot hold. An escalation remains an ever-present threat. To paraphrase Chekhov, if in the first act you have a pistol hanging on the wall, it may be fired in the second act. Dear friends, no one can predict with certainty, and certainly no one wants to predict escalation. But we know, even from last week, how contagious the violence can be. Areas that are calm, but which contain heavy weapons and where the forces and formations are in close proximity, can be engulfed in violence in a matter of minutes. In this regard, areas east and northeast of Mariupol have been of particular concern in recent days. On Monday night, for example, our camera in Zhirokine recorded 20 undetermined explosions, nearly 700 tracer rounds in flight, and 44 rocket-assisted projectiles. The night before, the camera had recorded just tracer rounds and 1 rocket-assisted projectile. This we at least know. Dear friends, but there are many things we don't know. Further east from Zhirokine, in areas along the unsecured border with the Russian Federation, there is essentially an information black hole. In the past 2 weeks, all but one of the patrols to areas in and around Novosovsk have been denied access by the so-called DPR members. What is happening there? What are they hiding? Our experience of freedom of movement restrictions goes back to the very first days following our deployment to Donbass in March 2014. Threats, harassment, direct targeting, shooting at our monitors, destruction of unmanned aerial vehicles, mines and unexploded ordnance, ordering hospital staff not to give information on civilian casualties. All have one thing in common. They are designed to blind us, to prevent the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission from observing, monitoring, and reporting facts on the ground, facts that are invariably uncomfortable. Because the so-called DPR has excluded us from that border area, I cannot speculate on what exactly they are hiding. But where previously we have experienced such restrictions, we subsequently sometimes discovered build-up or forward movement of military-type hardware and personnel. Despite the restrictions, though, we have managed to gather some information, some indicators that all is not well in that area. On 25th June, for instance, one of our patrols was held at the so-called DPR checkpoint on the Telmanove-Novosovsk road. While there, the patrol members observed a 17-vehicle convoy consisting of 2 minibuses, 1 large bus, 4 military trucks and 10 civilian cars, all driven by men wearing military-style uniforms and masks. They were heading in the direction of Boykivske. Now, a week later, on 2nd of July, satellite imagery revealed the presence of 7 armored combat vehicles in Boykivske. Boykivske, you may know, lies about 10 kilometers from the strategically important Ukrainian-held town of Hranitne, just across the Kalmius River. About 25 kilometers further north in Kalmiuske, in a place we had previously identified as a staging post for weapons and personnel, the satellite identified 11 armored combat vehicles and over 50 military trucks. It would be a mistake to think that it's only the so-called DPR that has heavy weapons in violation of withdrawal lines. Look at almost any SMM daily report and you will see evidence that Ukraine armed forces are not fully adhering to their commitments. For example, just 3 days ago, on 4th July, a SMM mini UAV spotted what was assessed as a Eurogun multiple-launch rocket system in Mirolubivka. 2 days before, our monitors observed a surface-to-air missile system near Novokalinove, a tank near Nizhny, and 4 tanks near Toshkivka. Dear friends, because this is at heart a political conflict, albeit one involving violence, there can only be a political solution. That political solution is outlined in the Minsk agreements. It has been agreed by the sides. Politically disengaging creates a vacuum for even more violence. And when there is a political vacuum, it is filled by others. Others, usually men in uniform, intent on escalation, provocation, threats and violence. Vacuum encourages spoilers, sending a message, if not a direct order, that the political track is to be replaced with a military one. I can only hope that we are seeing, and what we are seeing, or should I say, what we are not seeing, in the border areas around Novosovsk is not an indication that such thinking prevails. One thing is certain. Serious escalation is highly likely if weapons, heavy weapons, are not withdrawn, if positions are not disengaged, if there is further build-up. Now, dear friends, there are many who will accuse me of alarmism, and I hope they are proven right. No one wishes to see an increase in violence and more death and destruction. But wishful thinking is not going to resolve this conflict. We cannot afford to ignore warning signs. We saw last week in Popasna, Svetlodarsk and Yasinovata that this virus can strike at any moment. While it is necessary not to ignore unpalatable facts, we should also not ignore the opportunities either. What I have outlined here is factual, and many of the facts we observe on the ground are indeed, to say the least, unpleasant. But there are other facts. We must, for instance, never lose sight of the fact that the sides have already signed the Minsk agreements. They have already agreed the way forward. They have already marked out the path to peace. All that is required now is implementation. Now, as usual at the end of my statement here, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 644 monitors, of whom 566 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 353 Ukrainian colleagues and 90 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, if you have questions, you're welcome.
Thanks. I have two questions. The first question.
Вже дякую. Так, є питання. Чи могли би трошки детальніше розповісти про загрози для членів СММ у непідконтрольних урядові районах? Оскільки зараз ми, очевидно, статистично ви краще сповідомлені, ніж я, наскільки це зростання різке і сильне, наскільки різко збільшується кількість цих загроз та неправильної поведінки щодо спостерігачів. Можливо, вони мають на меті просто викинути місію геть.
The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission reports on a regular basis the impediments imposed on it by the sites, while restrictions overall are kept in balance on both sides in terms of the restrictions. But looking into the nature of the restrictions, the ones we experience in areas not controlled by the government are by far more aggressive, intimidating than the ones we experience in areas controlled by the government. Now, in the beginning of the year, we had counted approximately 1 serious incident per week, and that is now, since March, April, up till now, has mounted up to 2 serious incidents per week. And serious incident is always then when life and health of our monitors are at risk or assets are being targeted. So that doesn't include every movement restriction, but is directly targeting or indirectly targeting our staff. Now, I cannot speculate what the intention is behind these impediments. I know, however, that there can only be one reason for these restrictions. It is to prevent us from monitoring, from reporting about facts that are very unpleasant to read for those who have committed this violence and the violations of agreements they have agreed. It can only be one reason. Finally, I also would like to make the case that restrictions themselves and in themselves are a fact. It clearly outlines where the sites have something to hide, and therefore our report should also be read in this regard. The events we experienced since 2 weeks now in the southern Donetsk region are a classical example of that.
Second question, do you have any kind of emergency plan if we would face again a situation like in summer 2014, or if there would be even more intimidations against OSCE members to retreat, to leave the area as a mean of last resort? Does such a plan exist?
The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, since its inception, has never left the Donbass, including never left the non-government controlled areas. The security situation is on a daily, hourly review. We will take any measure necessary to protect our staff, but that cannot be predicted now. But we are on alert, especially during these times now where tensions are very high. The relative or comparative low ceasefire violation numbers that we register are not reflecting the entire reality, because the readiness of the sites, the preparedness, the buildup of forces point towards tension, point towards escalation, and not the other way. And therefore we will be prepared to protect ourselves while still implementing our part of the deal, our contribution to a peaceful solution here within the framework of our mandate given to us by 57 participating states.
Thank you. The next question, please. The question will be coming in Ukrainian.
Crimean News. Mr. Hook, question about the information with denial of access near Novoazovsk. Mr. Hook, could you please give us more detail about the situation? Has the SMM addressed the JCCC for facilitation, and how the JCCC explains its incapacity to actually influence the militants of the DPR and actually facilitate movement of the mission? Thank you.
Thank you. I have just before outlined in quite some detail the impediments we face in that part of the Donetsk region not controlled by the government. The last restrictions that we had recorded there happened yesterday, so we'll find that in the report to be issued today. We, of course, always involve the Joint Center for Control and Coordination to resolve these problems for us, because they are obliged to do so under the Minsk agreements. In fact, they are to react rapidly to any impediments put in our way. That includes freedom of movement restrictions there. And we will both register and report on the failure of the JCCC to act and rapidly respond, but also in cases where they are actually able to respond positively and remove those obstacles. We will continue requesting access to those areas and any other area where we have no access at the moment. And I repeat once again, there can only be one reason why they are preventing us from reaching the Novozovsk area near that unsecure border with the Russian Federation, because there is something that they don't want us to see, and that is a fact in itself and is reflected in our reports whenever we experience these restrictions.
Thank you. Do you have more questions?
I have one concerning your technical equipment. Last time when Mr. Kurz was here, and the first time when he was here, we have also talks about better cameras or more cameras in the area, more infrared cameras, so that you can better observe the situation in the night. How important this equipment can be, having in mind that they are shutting down drones, that you have restrictions to areas where you cannot use, at least without satellites, this modern equipment. How important this equipment is really?
Thank you. I first can confirm that we increase our capacity in terms of cameras and UAVs gradually, as foreseen in our planning documents. We, for instance, will now assess the possibility of mounting a high-quality camera in the Donetsk water filtration station itself, in that very high kinetic area. 16 other cameras will be coming in the summer that will be placed around known hotspots and entry-exit checkpoints where we will be able to mount these cameras. Now, it is very important to recognize that while this will allow us to monitor more, if there is no commitment by the sides to actually act on this information, the situation is unlikely to change. It is therefore very important to put the emphasis on the action or inaction by those who have committed to take action to bring this situation back to normal. We, of course, will contribute with information, but that information needs to be echoed with reaction and remedial action by the sides to prevent violence from further spreading, which I have compared in my statement before, spreads like a virus, and for that you need treatment, and that treatment can only come from the sides. We can only detect where the virus is spreading, and that should enable the sides to take the necessary actions to intervene.
Are there more questions? If there is no questions, thank you, Mr. Hook.
Thank you.